everyone, my name is Sima. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be ranking the characters of the Dear Evan Hansen movie based on how badly I think they need to stand trial for war crimes. I've done other videos like this before on my channel, but it's usually been on a more positive note. It's usually been ranking characters based on how bad they want them to throw me through objects, stuff like that, and I'll pop that playlist somewhere up on the screen. But this time I just could not in good conscience rank these characters in that manner, and I just had to rank them in terms of just how badly they upset me. And obviously this video is a lot of hyperbole. I don't actually think any of these people have committed war crimes, just before anyone calls me out for, I don't know, minimizing the severity of a war crime. But I do think they need to stand trial for something. It was a deeply upsetting movie. This plot made me a little bit insane, and I really needed to talk about it. With all that being said, this video is obviously going to be talking about the subject matter of the movie. The movie contains discussions of suicide. There's a character who dies by suicide. We're also going to be talking about other mental illness issues like depression and anxiety, etc. So if any of that is triggering, feel free to not watch this video. I'm obviously not going to be making light of those subjects, but we are going to reference them in a pretty lighthearted video. So I don't know, just viewer discretion advised. I wanted to put that out there. But if you feel comfortable, please keep watching. We're going to talk about this movie. Hello. Also, I just want to acknowledge how freaking cute I look right now. It is not even October yet, but spooky season is in full effect. I'm ready to go. So this movie is based off of a musical, and if you know me, you know that I am not the biggest fan of musicals. I'm not the biggest fan of musical theater in particular, but I also am of the opinion that when something crosses over from the stage to film, people who are not necessarily stage people then have the right to share their opinion. Not to say that if you are before it's a movie, people that aren't musical people shouldn't be able to spread their opinions about it, but I do think not being a theater person, you can still share your opinions about a movie. Once it enters the sphere of movies, just moviegoers are allowed to be hey, this sucked and it didn't translate well, and it doesn't matter how well it translates on stage, or if the musical did X, Y, and Z. It's a movie now. I'm going to talk about the movie specifically. I might reference the musical, but I've never seen the musical. I have no interest in seeing the musical. Any information about the musical I've just picked up here and there, just because I was on Tumblr when this was very big, and just by reading articles that other people have written about this. I originally wasn't going to do this because, like I said, I'm not a big musical person. I had no reason to really watch this, but this movie was the advertising for it was insufferable. I could not escape it, the targeted advertising on my Twitter feed, Facebook, Tumblr. It was just everywhere, and I just saw so many articles ripping into this movie, and it was one of those things where it's a lot of the times when reviews rip into movies, I'm I don't necessarily agree. But a lot of times when they do rip into movies, I'm also you're totally right. So I kind of wanted to watch it for myself and see if those articles and reviews were taking things out of proportion. And I think yes and no. I think they were focusing on things that I also had issues with, but I also was no, you're nitpicking at things. It doesn't matter how old or young Ben Platt was. That issue just exasperated an existing issue in this movie, in that the sense is this movie, the plot is insane. It fully tries to humanize a character, and not even humanize, because you can humanize characters that are bad people, but they never once it's the producers never really thought about how their protagonist was not a good person and was not doing things that would any sane audience would root for. And so even when they're trying to give him his comeuppance for being a bad person, they will still warp it in a way where you're still kind of meant to feel bad for him, because all the bad things he did were not really his fault. And it was one of those weird experiences where I felt the movie was trying to, I hate when people say movies are gaslighting them, because I don't actually think that's a thing that can occur, but I did genuinely feel they were trying to warp reality and be oh, well, all these terrible things weren't actually that bad because of X, Y, and Z. And I was just sitting there no, they're pretty shit still. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's just jump into the ranking. Usually when I start from the bottom, it's I work my way up towards my favorite character, but this is kind of the opposite. Everybody I is going to be near the end of the list, and we're going to progressively get rantier as the list goes on. So I went on the Wikipedia page for this movie, and there were 20 characters, but the first 10 of them are they're names on a page, but they're not actually characters in the movie. But I just included them because usually these videos have 30 characters in them, and I just did not have that many options. So numbers 20 to 11 are Mr. Howard, who I believe is the principal, and then Naomi, Cherise, Greg, Josh, Isabel, Layla, Keys, Gemma, and Oliver, who are all on the Wikipedia page, and I assume are I think Mr. Howard is the principal, and I think everybody else is just characters that go to the school. So friends of Zoe, friends of, I mean not Connor, because Connor didn't have friends, but friends of Zoe, just people in the hallways, friends of Alana, just characters that were in the vicinity of the high school. So I put all of them in the first 9 spots of this, just because they don't really exist as characters, they're just there. So I can't really think of why they would have to stand trial for war crimes. I don't think they violated any Geneva conventions. I just don't think they've done anything that bad besides just like the misfortune of being a teenager. Like they're already going through enough just being teenagers without me like having to like send them to Geneva to like answer for their crimes. So like we're gonna move on from them. Number 10 is also a character like this. It's Mrs. G, but I do have something to say about her because she is allegedly, like they mentioned in the movie that like that Connor, when he was like in 3rd grade, like threw a TV at her or threw something at her, a printer. He threw a printer at her. They say that when Connor was in 3rd grade, he threw a printer at her. And she's one of the people that Evan goes to at the end of the movie to like ask about Connor and learn about his life. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so she clearly, well, I guess it's hard to forget this kind of student, but she clearly has something to say about him. She has fond memories of him despite all this. And I feel like she's probably a figure that like tried her best to like help this problem student of hers, and she just like seemed like a sweet person. So like I can't like, because she has like more of a character, I can't like definitively say that she's done nothing wrong ever like I can with everybody else who I just didn't see anything of. Like obviously like this kid was someone who like fell through the cracks, and so like I think all of the adults at any point in his life like do shoulder some of the blame, but I also just think she has like fewer transgressions of like most anybody else in this film, so that's why she's still pretty low on the list. Number 9 is Zoe Murphy. So Zoe is like probably the most like human relatable like actual character with lines in this film, just because it's one of those things where it's like her storyline. The thing that like frustrated me so much about this movie is like it had a lot of really interesting threads that could have gone somewhere if they had just like moved away from Evan. If they had just been like, forget Evan, let's focus on these like very nuanced struggles. Like Zoe's whole thing of like, how do I mourn somebody who was so terrible to me but who I still feel so strongly about because that person was my family, that person was my brother. Like how on earth do you even begin to unpack that? Like clearly he was struggling, clearly he was in pain, but like nevertheless at the end of the day he hurt me, and his own struggles are not an excuse or a justification for like the ways he hurt me, and he still needs to, like, if he was still around, he would still need to be held accountable for the ways he hurt me. And so it's like Zoe's struggle was so like human and real, and I just thought it was so like powerful. And like Caitlin Dever, I don't know how you say her name, but she like acted the shit out of this. Like, she was like, I think one of my favorite like actors in this movie. She really like it was just like, it was like she was truly like, I just felt so much like empathy for her. And it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, like you were just like in a shitty situation, like this person that you cared about who like treated you so poorly is gone, like suddenly, like it's just gone. He's killed himself. Like how do you begin to like deal with that? And then this person comes along and like gives you this false idea of like, oh well, maybe he wasn't so bad. And it's, I feel like as someone, like I feel like a lot of people who have been like abused, and especially when it's like a complicated type of abuse where it's like, it's not bad all the time, which is like honestly what I think a lot of abuse is like, is it's not bad all the time. It's bad like some of the time. It's one of those things where it's like, it's almost worse when you get the glimpses of like, oh, this person was good a lot of the time to other people, and they had a whole side to them that I never got to see, and like, why didn't I ever get to experience that? And I think it's one of those things where she was in such a tough position, and like this guy comes along, shows the side of her brother, and then you find out the whole thing is a lie, and he's been lying to you this whole time and manipulating you, even if he wasn't like trying to be manipulative. Like at the end of the day, like Evan was manipulating the Murphys, and he was like lying to them for the duration of the movie about Connor. And like I can't even imagine, like honestly, like yeah, Zoe hasn't committed war crimes, but I think she deserves to commit a few. Like I think someone should give Zoe a sword. It was just like, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, like she, by and large, like I was like, I wanted to give her a hug. I truly was just like, oh my god, you poor child. Yeah, like it's like one of those things where it's like if I wanted to look for a flaw, it's like, I guess like she could have been like I want to be like, okay, well she could have been a little bit more empathetic to like her brother's struggles, but it's like we don't see what Connor is like outside of like 2 scenes. We don't get to see like really any of their interaction. Like that was the biggest flaw in this movie for me. It was like, well, there's a lot of flaws, we're gonna get to flaws, but like my biggest struggle was like, you don't get a sense of who Connor was at all. Like you get like 2 scenes of him, and then everything else you hear about him is either stuff people are making up or like hearsay from his family. And so it's like all of them are like obviously warped by their own perceptions, but you never really get a sense of like who Connor really was. And I think they were trying to give you a sense of who Connor was with that very last scene in the movie, but like they don't, and we'll talk about this when we get to Connor, but like they just don't do a very good job of it. So you never like get the sense of who Connor is, and like everything the movie tries to tell you is like, I'm sorry, this is not talking about like Zoe anymore, but like everything the movie tries to tell you is like so, like it just feels so hollow because all of their messages are built on top of this like baseline lie that Evan has concocted. So it's like, you can be like, oh, like you're not alone, you will be found, all you want. and you can sing all these beautiful songs. I will say, like, as someone who doesn't like musicals, I did enjoy quite a few of the songs in this, but like you can just like say all those things and sing all those things all you want, but they're all built on this like base lie, and so like all of it rings hollow. Like, I don't know, like, will I be found, or will someone like when I'm gone like spread bullshit about me for like social clout? So it's just one of those things where, yeah, like there's really nothing I can say negatively about Zoe. Like yeah, like obviously, like as an adult I can look at her and be like, oh, I think she'd be a little more empathetic to like your brother's struggles. Like clearly he was going through a rough time, but it's like that's not a fair burden to place on someone. Like people should have interfered far sooner to help Zoe and Connor. Like Zoe should have never had to be in the position to have to defend herself against someone who was lashing out because they were clearly in pain and clearly going through something and clearly struggling really heavily. So anyway, that's why Zoe's where she is. Like I truly, out of the named established characters in this film, like I don't think anyone else can possibly be lower than Zoe. Number 8 is HEIDI Hansen. Okay, so Evan's mom, like first, like, oh my god, I don't even know where to start. Like again, it's one of those things where like Zoe's like a teenager, so she like just by default is like less culpable, but like if I could put HEIDI lower I would, just because like again she's one of those characters where she like did not deserve the way people treated her in this movie. Like the way Evan treats his mother, appalling, abhorrent. And it's like, yeah, like on one hand I want to like give him the benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, well, he's a teenager. I feel like when you're a teenager you don't fully grasp how difficult it is for your parents to be your parents. But like I remember being a teenager and I remember going through a lot of shit directly because of my parents and still having a little like good grace to like recognize when they were working hard and when they were struggling, and like to see them as like fully fleshed out people. Whereas like Evan's mom does so much for him, is clearly trying her best, and all he does is treat her like shit. Like she has nothing to answer for. She's like a single mom doing her best, trying her hardest to like help her son who is like very ungrateful, and she never gives up hope. She like her one like moment of like lashing out really is like when Evan, like she finds out Evan's been lying to her this whole time and like basically like inserting himself into a whole nother family and like sharing their business, and like on one hand I think like fully like I guess her one like crime that she maybe should answer to you is like, I think when like rich people are like trying to like redistribute their wealth, I think if you're not a rich person, it's like part of your responsibility to take their wealth and like redistribute it, just because I feel like rich people have too much money. But it's not even like a real flaw. Anyways, I love HEIDI. Julianne Moore, I think it's Julianne Moore, that's the actress, right? Like fucking girl boss queen. I love her. She's okay, her acting was so good in this. Like again, one of my favorite actors in this movie was the acting for HEIDI. Like it was so good. Number 7 is Cynthia Murphy. This is kind of the same sort of thing where it's like one of those things where it was just like, it's hard to put her higher because she was just so sad. This whole, it was just Amy Adams looking sad. So I couldn't like, even when I think there were things that she was like culpable for, I couldn't like fully hold her responsible because I was just sitting there like, it's Amy Adams looking like despairingly at me. Like what am I supposed to do? Like hold her responsible? But it was like one of those things where it was like, I wanted to give her such a hug. Because again, it was one of those things where she like, you can tell she thought she did everything she could and she still came up short, and she is haunted by that. She's haunted by the loss of her son. She's haunted by all the things she like thought she could have done better. She's haunted by like trying to hold together the family she has and trying to like scrap together like this image of a son who is like not the last things she remembered, because her last memories of him were probably like not great. So she's really trying to like pull together this image of like, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad. Like maybe like there was something of the Connor I remember from when he was a child like still there, and like if everything Evan is telling me is true, then like maybe it wasn't so bad. Like maybe he wasn't in pain all the time. Maybe we weren't like failures as parents. Maybe like there was something that we did right. And like you can like that really comes through. And like truly the only thing I think she should go and stand trial for is like, she has that like rich white woman syndrome problem where she has like too much money, so she just throws it at things, and it's like I think she's it's honestly not even a rich white woman thing, because my mom does this too, but it's like one of those things where it's like, I think she wanted there to be an answer that was quick too much. Like the way it sounded just based on like snippets. Again, I think this movie would have been better if it focused so much more on like the Murphys just in general and not on like Evan. Like I don't care about Evan at all. But I think the big issue was like, she wanted an easy answer. She wanted like, if I tried this and it doesn't work in 2 weeks, let's try something else because clearly this isn't working, instead of realizing that like the problems were so deep rooted that they just needed time. They needed time, they needed energy, they needed space, and it wasn't like a quick fix solution. And my mom does this a lot where she'll like be like, oh, you've been going to like 3 therapy sessions, like why isn't like X issue of yours like resolved yet? And it's like, mom, like you can't resolve things that quickly. Like some things just need time, and they need patience, and they need effort. And I think, and I can understand from my mom's perspective, like you want your child to not be in pain anymore, and when you think something's not working, you want to try something else because surely there's something that will put your child out of their pain like quicker. But it was just, I think like she just probably approached it wrong, and it was like one of those things where she could have done better, but like every parent can do better, right? Like it's one of those things where like you can always be like, okay, well, what if I'd done this differently? So I don't think she did anything that was like unforgivable, and I have a lot of empathy for her because she's truly she broke my heart. She really did. It was just like the way she was just like clinging to like anything she could, and like just like so clearly like a woman falling apart. And like when Evan finally like reveals his whole shindig of like all the lies he's been telling, just the way she like is both trying to like, you know, not explode at him and just like be like, okay honey, you need to go, because she's also come to see this boy as her like another son, but she's also so clearly like falling apart because the last shreds of her actual son are like, they're all made up. It's just, oh, the acting was so good. Amy Adams like sold it. Like truly, like why was Ben Platt, why was Evan in this movie? We're gonna move on, but like I'm so infuriated. Number 6 is Connor. It's just like a ranking that I was doing like in a truly biased manner. Like Connor would be number 20. I don't think he needs to answer for anything, but I'm trying to be like as unbiased as I can. And like obviously Connor was a troubled person, and he was a person that for like, I don't know, because we don't know anything about Connor, they don't tell us anything about Connor, but like for like seemingly reasons that were not super in his control, he lashed out a lot at people, and thus he hurt the people around him a lot. And so I think it's one of those things where like the reasons can explain your actions, but you still need to be held accountable for them. You still need to apologize to the people you hurt. You still need to like be like, once you can like recognize that you've inflicted wrong about people, you still need to like make amends for those things, right? Like it's like your mental illness can explain your actions, but it doesn't excuse your actions. And I think Connor, it was one of those things where he clearly would lash out at people based on everything Zoe says. Like they had a rough relationship in their later years, and like they didn't get along. If not, Connor was straight up like abusive. We don't really know the extent of things. We don't like see anything. We just like hear about it. But it was one of those things where he very clearly like did wrong people. And like I think if he was not like a dead mentally ill teenager, like I would think, okay, yeah, you should stand trial for this. But I just don't think, like, considering the circumstances, it's like there are so many worse people in this film. Like truly, like that's the thing about Connor, like that infuriates me so much. It's like I think Connor, we just don't know anything about him. We get like 2 scenes with Connor, and everything else is just like a lie. It's all just like everything shit like Evan makes up about him. But like in the 2 scenes we see, like you can tell he's struggling, and you can also tell he wants to be better. Like his like offering to sign Evan's cast and like being like, oh, we both pretend we have friends. Like it makes me genuinely so sad, because that's so clearly a teenager who's like, just like I can't say teenager, but like literally it's just like, it's a kid. It's a kid who is on the brink, who is like going under and struggling and like trying to reach out and trying to make those connections, and like for whatever reason he can't make them, but he's trying so hard. And like for whatever reason, because they don't really get into it, he had like struggles that made it really hard for him to connect people in an authentic way, and made him like paranoid and easily jump to conclusions and just like assume the worst of people. And like he had a lot going on, and he didn't get the help he needed. And it's like, it's upsetting, because it's like you can't even like be like, okay, well he needs to answer for his war crimes, because he's not even around. He like kills himself. He's not around to answer for any of those things anymore. And so it's like, yeah, like I can't even like justifiably put him higher, because I'm just like, he's never gonna have the chance to make those amends. So I don't even think he has an answer for anything, because he clearly was in such like horrible pain that like nothing anyone in a trial could say to him is like worse than anything he was going through on his own. And it just like, it breaks my heart that he doesn't actually get to, I don't know, get better and answer for those things, you know? Like he can't make amends. I don't know. It's like genuinely like, it upsets me. And like more than anything else, like the reason like Connor could have literally like killed someone before dying in this film, and I still would have been like, he's not number 1, just because like the way Connor is treated. Connor's not even a character in this movie. Like he's a prop. He's literally a prop to propel the plot of other people forward. He's not a full-fledged person. Everything most people think about him is completely made up based off like Evan's lies. He, again, like I said, every song that is supposed to be like uplifting and meaningful is like, it just rings so hollow, because it's all based off of this lie that Evan is making up about Connor. Like Connor is not a real person. He's the ghost of a person that Evan is like trying to fill. And it infuriates me. It infuriates me so much that like the entire like premise of this movie falls flat because of the way it treats Connor, and the way Connor is a prop for the whole thing. And he just like isn't like not even like a fully fleshed out person. you don't know anything about him, and his like memory is basically just dragged around and run through the mud for the like propelling of the plot of other people. So that's upsetting. And I think that the actual person that needs to stand war crimes is whoever decided that Connor's hair needs to be short for this movie, because I know for a fact, I haven't seen the musical, but I know for a fact he had long hair in the musical. I'm going to insert a picture because like this is like the ideal like look for anybody, and I'm just like infuriated that like they cut it short. Like it's not relevant to anything we're talking about, it's not relevant to the plot, it's not relevant to like the message, but like I just generally think anybody who takes a male character who has long hair and decides to cut their hair short for any sort of adaptation should actually genuinely stand trial for war crimes. Go to Geneva. You violated the Geneva Conventions. I am so fucking pissed at you. Yeah, anyway, so like it's upsetting. Like yes, he was mean to his sister and did some horrible things and like pushed Evan and like was maybe like, you know, snappy at people, and everybody thought he was like, you know, prone to like lashing out. But I don't know, it's just like I feel like he doesn't even get the chance to be a character, and that in itself is like enough of a punishment. It's like just like genuinely like the way, I don't know how you can call yourself like I don't it's frustrating because I don't know how you can like advertise yourself as a film about like mental health and suicide and like, I don't know, like just reaching out to people and knowing you're not alone, when the actual person who was the most alone and who actually kills himself gets treated so poorly by the narrative. Like the narrative completely, like the narrative erases the actual Connor. Like the actual Connor is gone, and you get like a glimpse of him at the very last scene where like Evan goes and finds that video of him playing the guitar and spreads it around. But again, like that, even that is not like framed as like getting to know Connor in any way. It's framed as like a redemption plot device for Evan. Like it's not about Connor. Like nothing in this movie is about Connor, even though the inciting incident is Connor's suicide. So it's just like, anyway, it's just, it's upsetting. I don't know why anyone thought this was like a good idea for like a narrative. Like local struggling kid kills himself, local other struggling kid like decides to like lie about how they were best friends, so, and go on this like crusade to like, you know, keep his memory alive based entirely on fabrications and lies because he's too like socially anxious to like do anything else. And I'm supposed to feel sympathy for Evan? No, absolutely not. I feel the most sympathy for like literally every single one of the Murphys. Okay, let's move on to number 5, which is Alana Beck. So Alana honestly is like a pretty good character. Like she's like an interesting character. I think she's a fleshed out character. I think she's like a resonant character. Like I think a lot, like her song made me like get teary. I'll be really honest with you. I liked Alana, but she's so high up on this because like literally like I cannot believe the the audacity, because she like we obviously knew that it was not actually Connor's suicide note, but she took a note that she thought for all intents and purposes was the last thing Connor wrote to Evan before he killed himself, and something that Evan told her not to share. Like very specifically was like, hey, this is the suicide note, don't spread it on the internet. And she posts it on Instagram. Like I cannot even explain to you how infuriating that is. And like the thing with this movie is like you have to like I have to keep into account like, okay, a lot of these actions are like impulsive teenage actions, and I was like an impulsive teenager once upon a time. It like disgusts me actually like how long it's been since I was a teenager. I haven't been a teenager in 6-7 years. Disgusting actually. Like I can't, like it hurts my brain to think about. But I don't care what age you are. I feel like, forget the like just the whole like posting the suicide note. If someone asks you not to do something explicitly because it's gonna hurt someone and you do it anyway, go to trial. Go, maybe not like the adult war crimes, but definitely like juvenile detention war crimes. Like answer for that, Alana. What the hell? Like why would you ever, no matter what the cause was, no matter if you thought the greater good of like raising money for the orchard was like worth it or whatever, why would you ever think it was okay to take someone's suicide note, the last thing they wrote before they killed themselves, something that their family hasn't publicized, the person it was addressed to hasn't publicized, and the person who it's addressed to tells you not to publicize it, and then you still publicize it because you think it'll get you the last like, amount of money you need for your orchard project? No, I'm sorry. Like that was like the thing where I was like it's so upsetting because like I wanted to root for Alana so badly, but it was just one of those things where I was like, oh my god, girl, what are you doing? So anyway, like that was the thing. It's just like that was her transgression, but it was like such a huge transgression where I was just sitting there like, oh my fucking god, I don't care how mentally ill you are, how depressed you are, you were explicitly told not to do this and you did it anyway. And like it doesn't even matter that it wasn't actually Connor's suicide note, it was like something Evan wrote to himself, because like she didn't know that. She did that assuming it was his suicide note. Anyway, so like unforgivable, infuriating, and she like immediately feels bad and cries about it and it's like, oh no, I can't do anything about it because it's out on the internet, and once it's out on the internet you can't do it. Yeah girl, then why did you post it? Okay, we're almost done, I swear. Number 4 is Jared KALWANI. I think that's his last name. I know they changed his last name for this movie. Jared is number 4 because well, he's not like a fleshed out character, so I can't even be like, okay, well, he had like his moments where he was like empathetic. Like, he was not a sympathetic character in any capacity. He was kind of there to be like comic relief, but like half of his comic relief was like insinuating that his friend and the dead kid were like gay lovers. And to my understanding, this was like, he was not, I think he's bi in the film. He's not in the play, or like they don't insinuate he's bi in the play. So I think they did that in the film to make it like a little bit less like straight boy making homophobic jokes about the dead kid. But he's still like out there making jokes at the expense of a dead kid. And not the whole like, oh, you guys were gay lovers jokes, but the fact that he thinks it's funny that like that's what people think is like, okay, so like even if they were, like why is that funny to you? 1, 2, he literally killed himself. Like, why are you making jokes about someone who like died like yesterday of suicide? Like, it was just one of those things where it was like extremely weird. And then the movie tries to like make me feel bad for him when like Evan stops hanging out with him, but I'm literally just like, whatever, like birds of a feather, like you guys both suck. It was just like, yeah, it was just one of the things where I was like, he didn't give me anything to root for him for. And then the times he was on screen, he was being a dick about like mentally ill people. So I was kind of like, whatever, I don't care about you, Jared, sorry. It was nice to see like brown people representation, but like it was not the representation I wanted. It was not the representation I needed. So it did like fuck all for me, frankly. Sorry, Jared. I think you, again, it's like juvenile war crimes court, but it's still a war crime and I want you to answer for it. I am like deeply upset. Number 3 is Larry MORA, who is Zoe and Connor's stepfather. So to my understanding, in the actual musical, Larry is just their dad. He's not their stepfather, he's their biological dad. And so I don't know why they changed it in the movie. I find that to be like a stupid thing to change, just because it's like, were they trying to give Evan and Zoe something to bond about like not having their actual dads around? Or like, I don't understand what the point of it was, besides like, I don't know, having a weird moment where they're gonna accuse Larry of caring less about Connor because Connor's not his actual son. Like, it was just like, it was like a weird point of drama to introduce for no reason and then not go anywhere with. It was just like an offhand line about how like Amy Adams is yelling at him about how, oh, he never cared because like Connor wasn't his. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, I've always been there. I've been there since Connor was 3. Like, he's obviously like my son too. And it was just like this pointless drama that didn't get resolved. And I don't know if they're trying to like make a point like, oh, like, look, like the stress of all this is like putting such like a burden on their relationship that they're like hurling these awful accusations at each other that have no basis. But if that's what they were trying to do, they did it just really poorly. Like, I didn't understand what the point was in making him the stepfather and not like just like Connor's dad. And also, again, I just hate this, like, I hate this predominant like narrative of like step parents or adopted parents just being like lesser than like biological parents. It was just like a weird thing to throw. Like, why would you assume that like Larry's failures, because he does have failures to our understanding, why would you assume his failures were because he didn't care about Connor because Connor wasn't his child, and not just that those were his failures because it's incredibly difficult to navigate the situation that he was in? 1. But he's still number 3 because according to Amy Adams, or sorry, according to Cynthia, the previous time Connor attempted suicide or said he was going to kill himself, Larry told him that Larry said he was just doing it for attention, which is obviously like a very shitty thing to do. And it's one of those things where, again, we just don't have enough context where it's like, okay, did he say that to Connor? Did he say it in like a moment of frustration, but he doesn't actually mean it? He genuinely is just like struggling, doesn't know what to do. It's one of those things where it's like objectively a horrible thing to say, and it's obviously a not true thing to say. Like, people don't attempt suicide just because they want attention. Like, they obviously do that because they're in like horrendous amounts of pain. But all that being said, like, there are moments in this film where you can see that Larry very clearly loved Connor, is haunted by his failures, and like doesn't know what else he could have done, and like genuinely thinks he's done his best. And like, obviously he didn't do his best. Obviously there were flaws there. Obviously after Connor dies, he doesn't handle it well and like shuts off, and like there's a lot of things you can say about Larry, and he obviously wasn't perfect. He obviously like, did a lot of things and said a lot of things that were wrong, which is why he's number 3. Like, I think he should. Geneva Convention, war crimes. Why would you say a suicidal child, your suicidal child, is faking it for attention? Like, why would you ever say that? Why would you assume that they're not doing their best? Even like it's just one of those things where it's like, I can have empathy for him because it's a difficult situation. I can have empathy for him because it's really hard no matter what to be a parent, but it's particularly hard to be a parent when you don't understand how to help your child and you don't understand what to do and you think you've done everything. But that's like an abhorrent thing to say. It is an unforgivably awful thing to say, and it like obviously didn't make the situation better for Connor. Connor, like, I think he just wanted to connect to Connor in ways that were obviously not connecting to Connor. Like, he wanted to connect to him through baseball and through things that Connor liked when he was a child, and was really not like, I feel like, looking at like the Connor in front of him and seeing what needed to be seen. And again, I'm extrapolating a lot because this movie does not tell you anything about the Murphys actually. Like the Murphys' home life, the Murphys before all this, you don't know anything. It's like you get like little bits of dialogue and then you have to like paint a whole picture. Because we're just like focusing on Evan and how like Evan's like socially, like has social anxiety. Like, okay, bitch, me too, the fuck? So yeah, I think like Larry's biggest like violation of the Geneva Conventions and his biggest war crime is just like the amount of like, the lack of sympathy I think he had. Like, even in like that No Requiem song, like he like is upset that Connor left them despite everything they did for him, and that Connor was weak, and that Connor like, I don't know, just like threw away everything they had. And it's like, please, sir, I know you're in pain, but like find a smidge of sympathy for your son who is struggling and is now dead. Like, yeah, the lack of sympathy is the biggest war crime and why I think he's number 3. So number 2 is actually one of those, he was almost way lower on this list because again, he was a name on a Wikipedia page that I didn't recognize. But number 2 is Sky, who according to Wikipedia is played by the guy that I recognize to be the dickhead in the hallway at the beginning of the movie that tells Connor that he has, the line of dialogue I believe is nice nails, very school shooter chic. Which is like such a weird thing to say. I'm pretty sure in the musical that's a line about Connor's hair, and they changed it to his nails because I guess they didn't give Connor the long hair, which again, this is why you should just give him the long hair, because at least that kind of makes sense. But look, what does that mean? What does nice nails, very school shooter chic mean? What male school shooter painted his nails black? Is that like a thing? Because I don't recognize that to be a thing. I like genuinely don't, like I cannot recall anything in that scenario. Like the hair comment at least kind of makes sense. Again, it's not accurate, but at least you could be like, okay, well, I kind of get it. I don't understand it in relation to nails at all. But he is just like, he's in the movie for like 2 seconds to be like a dickhead and a bully and like say something really horrible to like a kid who's like already like clearly unpopular and like already a target. So yeah, like fuck you, Sky. I'm gonna upgrade you to like adult court, stand trial for your war crime of like being a dickhead. And yes, I think teenagers to some extent are just like allowed to be like kind of shitty because they're teenagers and their like brains aren't fully developed, but it's also like, you were in this movie for 2 seconds, I have nothing else to think of you other than dickhead, said a really shitty thing to a kid. Don't like you. I think you should answer to the Geneva court and also to like the entire planet at large. I think you should live in infamy. I think you should just like really reevaluate your life choices. Also, your hair is bright orange, and I don't know how you have the audacity to make any comments about other people when I know for a fact gingers get oppressed all the time. So like, why wouldn't you find some sympathy and also be like, okay, maybe if I don't want to be like bullied, I should also not be bullying others. So that's Sky. Anyway, finally, last and definitely least, like I was gonna say certainly not least, but he's definitely least. I hate this guy so much. Our fucking protagonist, Evan Hansen. I don't know why anyone, like even when this was a musical, I don't understand why it was such a phenomenon. Like there are a few songs that are really good. Like I will say, like I didn't like some of the songs, but I liked some of the songs quite a bit. But the actual plot of this entire premise is so mind-blowingly unsympathetic that I don't understand how anybody in their right mind was sitting here like rooting for Evan at any point. Like I don't like, because it's like, it would be one thing if it was like, okay, you have your protagonist and the narrative is aware that the protagonist sucks. But like the biggest flaw here was that like the narrative didn't seem to realize how badly Evan sucked. And so every time they like were like, oh, maybe he did something kind of shitty here, they would try to like redeem him in the most like stupid, like the least convincing way possible. They would be like, okay, well, he did this one tiny thing and therefore like his 2 hours of lying and manipulating and gaslighting people are totally forgiven. Or like, again, they do that thing where like, you're not supposed to feel bad for Connor or excuse Connor's actions even though he was mentally ill because he's treated like Zoe like shit, right? And he like pushes Connor and he does like awful things to the people around him. And yet you're supposed to excuse what Connor does because he's like socially anxious. Like that was basically what the movie was trying to get me to do. And I kept being like, I don't care how anxious you are. Like I have incredible amounts of sympathy for people that are socially anxious. I didn't go to the doctor for a year, even though I didn't have a period for a year, because I was too socially anxious to call my doctor. I have avoided a lot of things because I don't want to talk to people because I'm too anxious and it freaks me out. I do a lot of things solely because I'm socially anxious and they're not the correct or the right thing to do. And I make my life a lot harder and I avoid a lot of things because I get really incredibly anxious. So like I have immense amounts of sympathy for socially anxious people because I'm one of them. However, there's like a line And like Evan like sprinted across the line. Like he is just like so like if you don't know what I'm talking about, basically this kid kills himself, and he has a letter that Evan had written to himself in his pocket. So everybody assumes that this is Connor's suicide note and not just like a letter Evan wrote to himself that Connor took from him and had in his pocket. And because, like I said earlier, before Connor had taken the letter from him, Connor had signed a cast that Evan has because he's broken his arm. And he kind of like reaches out a bit and is like, okay, like maybe if I sign your cast, we can both pretend we have friends. And it's like this very clear moment of like him, one of the only like I think moments in the film that really like humanizes the real Connor, where you're like, okay, like this is like a kid who's struggling, but a kid who wants to be better and wants to make those connections. And based on those two things, like everybody assumes that Connor and Evan were best friends, and Evan just goes with it. Like Evan just like, not only does he like just like commit to the bit, he goes with Jared and they fabricate like a shit ton of emails to like make up this elaborate ruse of like being friends, because he's too socially awkward to tell the Murphys to their faces that like, you know, they weren't actually friends and this is a huge misunderstanding. And it's one of those things where I can see being anxious like in the moment, right? Like I have been there in the moment and just been like, okay, whatever. But like I've been doing this for months, and Evan could have just like gone home and like written a letter like in his bed, just like written a letter and then like passed that off to the Murphys and actually explained the situation. Like there was no reason to let this go on for months and to like aid in the delusions and to like spiral it out of control. Like you, like not only did you just go with it, you made it so much worse and you spun such an elaborate lie for no reason. And like you can tell it was like, again, it was like pure selfishness because he wanted to get closer to Zoe, which was super creepy. Like the whole premise of like that song where he's singing to Zoe all the things he's noticed about her because he's been like watching her for like years, and like it's kind of creepy, but he like tells her they're all things that her brother, who like didn't know how to reach out to her, noticed about her and would share with Evan, instead of it just being like Evan being incredibly creepy. That whole song made me so uncomfortable because it was like it was just Evan being a huge weirdo and Zoe having no idea and kind of like developing this hope that her brother, even if he treated her like shit, like did care about her. And that made me so uncomfortable. And it was all because, yeah, he wanted to like get close to Zoe. He wanted to like have his family because he was like unhappy that his poor, hardworking mother was just like so busy like trying to put food on the table and like do like good by him. And also like the whole way they portrayed his social anxiety was very weird to me too, because it was like at the beginning of the movie he like couldn't hold conversations with people, right? And he's been doing all this work and he's like still can like barely hold conversation, like runs away from people, can barely get out of sentence. And then as soon as he gets like attention and like social popularity, like you think that would make things worse, but then suddenly he's like totally fine, like going to people's houses and striking up conversations, and he just like has conversations with the Murphys and like bursts into the room and like has whole conversations with Alana and is like, okay, like spearheading the Connor project until he like blows it off to go be popular with Zoe. And it was just like, it's one of those things where it's like the way his like, obviously like things like your circumstances being better can like aid your mental illnesses, right? But like the way they wrote his like struggles decreasing because he was suddenly popular and like beloved by people because he was like best friends with a dead kid was just like so unrealistic. Like your social anxiety would not so rapidly get that much better if it was so severe solely because you're like kind of popular now. Like people are not socially anxious because they're unpopular, you know? Like they can be unpopular because they're socially anxious, but like suddenly becoming popular does not like rid you of your social anxiety or like even like decrease it to the extent at which they like portrayed it to down in this movie. So anyway, like Evan was just an extremely unsympathetic character who like used and abused and gaslit this whole family for his own benefit because he was too much of like a piss baby to like sit down and on his own time write a letter, you know? Like again, I fully recognize the social anxiety inducing situation of like someone telling you things and you being too panicked to like get a sentence out and like correct them. I get that, like that totally makes sense. But then he let this go on for months and did not write one thing to correct it until he absolutely has to spill at the end of the movie because he realizes his new like adopted family is like falling apart because of his lies. Then he comes clean. That's the inciting that makes it come clean. Like it just, he's so a truly infuriating character and a truly infuriating storyline. This movie, like the bad reviews are right, but they also like fully like minimize like what's actually an issue. They're all like, oh, Ben Platt looks too old. Like I think the whole issue with Ben Platt's age isn't that he looks too old, because like a lot of people who play teenagers in like media look too old to play teenagers. But in this movie where they're especially trying to get you to like let things go because you're like, oh well, the character is a teenager and teenagers can make shitty decisions because their brains aren't fully developed. When you have a fully grown man playing a teenager, and then you're constantly telling me like, oh, like don't take it so seriously because he's a teenager and teenagers are allowed to fuck up. You really need a teenager to play that part. Like it wasn't even like that he's 27, because like Zoe or Caitlin Dever, who plays Zoe, is like 24, 25. So it's not like she's that much younger than him, but she actually looks like a teenager and she acts like a teenager. Ben Platt, it was like they were trying so hard to make Ben Platt a plausible teenager that it had like the opposite effect, where it was like super uncanny valley, and he looked like way too much like somebody, like an adult, like very much like, how do you do, fellow kids, was the vibe he was getting off. But it was also like, because he looked so unlike a teenager, it made Evan's actions so much worse, because like you would have, like, no matter how much you were telling yourself this is a teenager, let it go, it's a teenager, it was like I was looking at a grown man and I just like could not do it. Like everybody else, like Jared passed for a teenager, Zoe passed for a teenager, Alana passed for a teenager. I'm sorry, Ben Platt does not pass for a teenager. And in this movie, when you so heavily need to rely on the goodwill of the audience to let things go because the protagonist is a teenager and not an adult, and to not hold a teenager to the same standards you hold an adult, you need to cast someone who can pass reliably as a teenager. And they didn't do that. So yeah, this entire plot was abhorrent. It was insulting. It was like, yeah, it was just like, it was so insulting to like, just like the concept of being mentally ill and the concept of being anxious, and like, just like as a person with social anxiety, the idea that like some people are gonna look at this movie and be like, oh, that's how socially anxious people act. Upsetting. Like, no. Yeah, it was just like infuriating. It was insulting to socially anxious people. It was insulting to mentally ill people at large. It was insulting to people who feel suicidal. It was just like, I don't understand how this plot, like I don't care about like the staging or whatever, how did this plot win as many Tony Awards as it did? Like do people in the musical theater community just like let go of like their brains if like the songs are good enough? Because it was like truly like nothing could distract me from how awful Evan was. Not the songs, not the acting. I was just sitting here like, who am I meant to be rooting for here? Because I'm not rooting for anybody, and I just feel very sad for like the Murphys, and I feel very, very sad for Connor, who again like is the most sympathetic person in this film, because he's like clearly someone who like wanted to be better and was struggling, and like with better resources and better support systems could have one day maybe come to like be in a position where he can make amends for the things he did wrong. And all the people around him who actually do have the opportunity to make amends were just like actively just being terrible people. Like Evan, terrible person. I'm sorry, like I need to stop. Anyway, that's this video. I'm gonna stop ranting. I cannot believe this is a movie that was made and they expected it to do well. That the backlash was surprising to them, because this is like an insane plot. Like I don't understand how this plot was like written and then like made into a musical that like hit Broadway, because like literally it's just like socially anxious kid gaslights suicidal kid's family after said kid kills himself. Like it's like insane. It is fully an insane plot. I don't understand it. It's like so upsetting. Literally just justice for like Connor Murphy, who doesn't exist, who literally does not exist and does not get to be a character, and everything that is built off of him is a complete lie. Upsetting. Anyway, Evan Hansen, I will see you in fucking Geneva. You are standing trial for war crimes. I cannot emphasize how insanely infuriating that movie was, solely because Evan's the protagonist. Like, why? I don't understand. I need to like, the people who wrote this, I need you to call me and like explain to me what the fuck you were thinking, because like it's all just the themes. The themes were so incoherent. Like I was like, are you trying to tell me like social media is bad? Are you trying to tell me that like mentally ill people need more social support? Like what were you trying to tell me? Because I don't know what it was. All I knew was like Evan sucked. Like that was all I knew. I didn't know what the theme was, but I did know that Evan sucked really hard. I think that's it. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm ranting. I'm sorry if this video was like not great. I was like literally just like, I was infuriated. I was gonna do a completely different video this week, and then I just got so mad about this movie that I was like, okay, I guess we're doing a ranking video, but different, because like I can't do a fun ranking video. I'm just gonna yell about things. So anyway, obviously this was hyperbole. I know a lot of people who are mentally ill like really care about this musical, and like it resonates a lot with them. I don't know if they feel that way about the movie, because like I don't know if people that like the musical like the movie or not. Like I don't know how well it translates. If it's important to you, and if it helps you, like power to you, but like it just like it was insane to me. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop talking. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you want to follow me on other social media platforms, you can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you want to hang out with me in the future, I post new videos every Wednesday, so please hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys all next week. Bye!